Commander Kang Min gripped the railing of his command bridge as another brilliant flash lit up the darkness of space. The Zilani cruiser, Star's Hope, had just become another ball of twisted metal and flame, its crew of 300 brave souls, lost in an instant. The Devourers showed no mercy, no hesitation. Their sleek black ships moved through space like hungry predators, each one bristling with weapon arrays that could crack a planet's crust. Shields at 30% and falling. "Fast," called out Tactical Officer Dongwu, sweat beading on his blue-scaled forehead. The young Zilani's forearms worked frantically across his control panel, trying to maintain their defensive systems against the relentless assault. Lieutenant So Young's voice cut through the chaos of the bridge. "Sir, civilian transports are still evacuating from the southern continent. At least 50,000 families are still down there." Her usually steady voice trembled with the knowledge that time was running out. Behind her, communication screens flickered with desperate messages from refugee camps and overloaded transport hubs. The Defender's Pride, their flagship, lurched violently to one side as a Devourer plasma cannon found its mark. Sparks flew from damaged consoles while emergency lighting bathed everything in an eerie red glow. Kang Min felt the deck plates vibrate under his feet as their engines strained to maintain position. "Return fire on Sector 7, he ordered, watching as their own weapons lashed out at the enemy formation. The blue energy beams struck a Devourer destroyer, but the mechanical ship's adaptive armor simply absorbed the impact and continued its advance. These machines learned from every attack, becoming stronger with each battle. Admiral Hyejin stood like a statue of ancient wisdom beside Kang Min, her forearms clasped behind her back in the traditional pose of deep contemplation. The eldest member of the Zilani High Council had lived through 3 centuries of peace, but nothing had prepared their people for this nightmare. Her silver hair caught the light from the tactical displays as she watched their last defense fleet being systematically destroyed. "Our ancestors spoke of starborn warriors who would come in our darkest hour," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. "Warriors from beyond the known systems, fierce and unstoppable, in their quest for justice. Perhaps they were just stories after all." Through the main view screen, Kang Min could see the surface of Kepler 442b, their final stronghold. Once green continents now showed ugly brown scars where Devourer harvesting machines had already begun their work. Entire forests vanished in hours, consumed by mechanical swarms that stripped every molecule of organic matter from the soil. Cities that had stood for millennia were being reduced to empty husks of metal and stone. "Sir, the orbital defense platforms are going offline one by one," reported Chief Engineer Min Su from his station. "The Devourers are targeting their power cores with surgical precision. We'll lose orbital coverage within the hour." Kang Min closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 7 billion souls depending on his decisions. The Zilani Confederation had been a beacon of peace in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They had welcomed refugees, shared their advanced medical technology freely, and never raised weapons against another species. Now they were paying the ultimate price for their pacifist ways. A massive explosion rocked the ship as the Golden Dawn, one of their heavy cruisers, broke apart under concentrated fire. Pieces of hull plating drifted past their view screen like metallic snow. Kang Min knew Captain Yeo-jin had been aboard that ship with her crew of 500. Good people, all of them, now lost to the void. "The evacuation ships are taking heavy fire as they try to break orbit," So Young reported, her voice cracking with emotion. 3 transports have already been destroyed. The Devourers are targeting the civilians on purpose. That was their way. The mechanical collective didn't just want to win battles. They wanted to harvest every living thing they encountered. Their ships were floating factories, converting organic matter into fuel for their endless expansion across the galaxy. They had already consumed 17 inhabited worlds in this sector alone. Kang Min moved to the communications array and activated the long-range distress beacon one final time. The powerful transmitter would broadcast their message across thousands of light years, though he knew the chances of anyone receiving it in time were virtually 0. "This is Commander Kang Min of the Zilani Confederation," he spoke into the recorder, his words carrying the desperation of an entire civilization. "Our worlds are dying. The Devourers have broken through our defenses and begun the harvest. We have fought with everything we have, but we are not warriors by nature. If anyone can hear this message, if there are any species out there with the strength to stand against this evil, we need help. Our children, our future, everything we have built over centuries of peace is about to be lost forever. The transmission faded into the cosmic darkness as Devourer landing craft began their descent toward the planet's surface like falling stars of death. 3 days had passed since the last message was sent into the void, and hope had become as scarce as clean air on the dying planet below. The mechanical harvesters worked around the clock, their massive spider-like forms scuttling across what used to be the great forest of Zeltar. Ancient trees that had stood for thousands of years were being consumed in minutes, ground down into raw materials that fed the Devourer war machine. Communications Officer Jin Ho sat hunched over his sensor array in the cramped emergency command bunker they had established deep underground. His scaled hands moved across holographic displays, showing the systematic destruction of their world. The Devourers had learned to be efficient. They no longer bothered with complete orbital bombardment. Instead, they deployed specialized harvesting, units that could strip an entire continent of life while preserving the useful minerals and metals beneath. The bunker shook as another harvester passed overhead, its gravitational manipulators peeling away layers of soil like an orange being skinned. Jinho tried to focus on his work, monitoring the few remaining orbital sensors that hadn't been destroyed. Most showed the same depressing data streams of Devourer ships maintaining their blockade around the planet. Then something changed. Jinho's primary display flickered with readings that made no sense. He blinked his large eyes and ran the scan again, certain his equipment was malfunctioning. The numbers couldn't be right. Energy signatures of that magnitude would require a fleet the size of an entire star system's defense force. "Commander," Jinho called out, his voice trembling with disbelief as he stared at the impossible data scrolling across his screens. "I'm reading massive hyperspace signatures at the system's edge. Unknown configuration, but the energy output is incredible." Commander Kang Min rushed over from the tactical planning table, where he had been discussing evacuation routes with the surviving council members. His boots echoed on the metal flooring of the bunker as he peered over Jinho's shoulder at the sensor readings. Lieutenant Da-Yun, their senior analyst, immediately began running diagnostics on the sensor array. Her forearms worked with practiced precision, checking and rechecking every system component. "The sensors might be damaged from the electromagnetic pulses," she muttered, but her voice carried doubt. The readings were too consistent, too organized to be random interference. After running the diagnostics twice, Da-Un's expression changed from skepticism to amazement. "Sir, the readings are accurate. There are hundreds of ships out there. Their technology signature doesn't match anything in our databases, not even theoretical designs from the ancient archives." The bunker's communication system suddenly crackled to life with intercepted transmissions from the mysterious fleet. The bridge speakers filled with sounds unlike anything the Zelani had ever heard. The language was harsh and guttural, full of sharp consonants and rolling sounds that seemed to carry barely contained fury. It was completely alien, yet somehow familiar in its raw emotion. Admiral Hye Jin, who had been meditating in the corner of the bunker, opened her ancient eyes and listened intently to the foreign voices. Her centuries of experience with different galactic languages meant nothing here. This was something entirely new. "They sound angry," she observed, tilting her head as she tried to understand the emotional undertones in the alien speech. On the surface, something unprecedented began to happen. The Devourer advance suddenly halted. For the first time since the invasion began, the mechanical harvesters stopped their relentless consumption, their collective consciousness, a vast network of artificial minds that had operated with perfect coordination, seemed to pause as if analyzing an unexpected variable. Devourer scout ships that had been patrolling the outer system began changing their formations, moving into defensive positions. Their sensors, designed to catalog and counter every known form of warfare in the galaxy, were struggling to classify the approaching fleet. The energy signatures were too chaotic, too unpredictable for their logical processing systems to understand. Jinho's sensors began picking up visual data as the mysterious ships dropped out of hyperspace. On the main display screen, angular vessels began to appear against the star field. They were unlike any ship design in known space, aggressive and predatory in their construction, with weapon arrays that seemed to have been built by someone who understood war on a fundamental level. The ships bore strange symbols that none of them recognized, geometric patterns and markings that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, as if the very metal they were painted on was alive with energy. Some vessels were massive, easily the size of Devourer battleships, while others were smaller and faster, darting between their larger companions like hunting wolves. "Count them," Kang Min ordered, his voice barely above a whisper as he watched the impossible sight unfold on their screens. Dayun's fingers flew across her console. 237 major vessels, sir, plus smaller craft. I'm reading over 1,000 individual ships total. This is a full battle fleet, possibly the largest military formation ever assembled in this sector of the galaxy. The Devourers were clearly as surprised as the Zilani. Their perfect formations began to shift and adapt, trying to analyze this new threat. But for the first time since the invasion began, there was uncertainty in their movements. Their collective intelligence was struggling to process something it had never encountered before. Admiral He-Jin stood slowly, her forearms trembling not with fear, but with something that had been lost for days. Hope. She moved to the main display and placed one weathered hand against the screen, watching as more ships continued to emerge from hyperspace. "By the ancient codes," she breathed, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "The Starborn warriors, they're real." The first transmission from the unknown fleet came through on a frequency the Zilani had never used before. Jinho scrambled to establish a stable connection as static-filled voices spoke in that harsh alien language. Within minutes, their translation computers were working overtime, trying to decode the complex linguistic patterns of these mysterious newcomers. Admiral Junseo's face appeared on the main screen of their underground bunker, and the Zilani leadership got their first look at humanity. His features were sharp and weathered, with dark eyes that held the weight of countless battles. Behind him, the bridge of the human dreadnought Indomitable buzzed with activity as crew members prepared for combat. "I am Admiral Junseo of the Terran Defense Fleet," he said, his voice carrying through the translation matrix with surprising clarity. "We received your distress signal 3 days ago and have traveled across half the galaxy to reach you." Commander Kang Min could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You came all this way for strangers? For people you've never met?" Junseo's expression remained steady, but something fierce flickered in his eyes. "No one fights alone," he declared. "Simply, that's not how we do things where we come from. Besides, the Devourers destroyed 3 of our colony worlds 6 months ago. New Sol, Terra Nova, and Harmony Station. 40 million people, gone in a matter of days. This is personal." The weight of those words hit everyone in the bunker. These humans hadn't just come to help out of pure goodness. They had their own score to settle with the mechanical invaders. Admiral He-Jin stepped forward, her 4 arms spread in the traditional Zilani gesture of respect and gratitude. "Your arrival has already changed everything," she said. "The Devourers have stopped their advance for the first time since the invasion began. They're analyzing your fleet, trying to understand what you are." Junseo's grin was predatory. "Let them analyze, they won't like what they find." Captain Yunwu took charge of coordinating the 2 fleets, and immediately the differences between human and Zilani military doctrine became apparent. The Confederation forces had been trained for defensive actions, using careful positioning and energy-efficient weapons to create barriers and safe zones. Their ships moved in elegant formations, like a carefully choreographed dance. The humans, on the other hand, approached warfare with a philosophy that seemed to embrace controlled chaos. Their fighter squadrons broke formation constantly, diving and weaving through space in patterns that looked random but were devastatingly effective. Human pilots pushed their craft to the absolute limits, pulling maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart. "Your people fight like demons," Admiral He-Jin observed as she watched the tactical displays. Human fighters were engaging Devourer interceptors in close combat, using ramming attacks and point-blank weapons fire that no sane pilot would attempt. One human pilot's craft had lost its main engines, but continued fighting, using thruster bursts to spin his ship like a top while firing in all directions. Another pilot deliberately flew her fighter into a Devourer's weapon array, sacrificing her ship to disable the larger vessel's primary guns. Both pilots ejected at the last second, their emergency beacons already being tracked by rescue ships. Jun Seo's expression darkened as he watched the same display. "We fight like humans. There's a difference." The Devourer Collective was struggling to adapt to human tactics. Their artificial intelligence was designed to counter logical military strategies, but humans seemed to thrive on improvisation and calculated risks that bordered on insanity. Every time the machines thought they had figured out a pattern, the humans would change their approach entirely. Lieutenant Commander Wu Jin led a squadron of human bombers on a seemingly suicidal run at a Devourer battleship. Instead of approaching in a straight line like conventional attack doctrine suggested, his pilots came in from 6 different angles at once, some flying upside down, others spinning their craft while firing. The Devourer's defensive systems couldn't track all the chaotic movement patterns simultaneously. "This is insane," breathed Captain Da Yun as she watched the human attack unfold. "They're treating space combat like some kind of extreme sport." The Devourer battleship's shields collapsed under the barrage, and Wu Jin's bombers planted their charges with surgical precision before peeling away in all directions. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a small sun, and debris from the destroyed ship scattered across several kilometers. As the combined fleet prepared for the final assault on the Devourer mothership, human boarding parties began, suiting up in their assault armor. Major Taeho moved through the preparation bay of his transport ship, checking on his Marines as they loaded their weapons and sealed their environmental suits. The Major's armor was scarred from previous battles, and his plasma rifle showed signs of heavy use. Unlike the elegant energy weapons favored by the Confederation, human military gear looked brutal and functional. Every piece of equipment was designed for one purpose: winning fights against impossible odds. "Remember, these machines think they understand warfare," Taeho addressed his troops. "They've analyzed every major military doctrine in the galaxy, but they've never faced humans before. They don't understand that we don't fight just to win battles. We fight to make sure our enemies never threaten innocent people again." The Marines checked their weapons one final time, the sound of charging energy cells and sliding ammunition clips echoing through the transport bay. Private Hyun-soo adjusted her helmet's targeting system, while Sergeant Du-young tested his portable shield generator. Major Tae-ho shouldered his rifle and looked out at the Devourer mothership growing larger on their approach screens. The massive vessel was easily 10 kilometers long, bristling with weapons and swarming with smaller craft. It looked absolutely impregnable. "Time to show these machines what happens when they mess with organic life," he said with grim satisfaction. The transport ships punched through the Devourer mothership's hull like hot knives through ice, their cutting beams carving perfect holes in the alien metal. Major Taeho felt his stomach lurch as artificial gravity kicked in, and suddenly they were inside the belly of the beast. The corridors of the massive ship stretched out in all directions, dimly lit by pulsing blue lights that seemed to follow some mechanical rhythm. "Stay together and watch your corners," Taeho commanded as his Marines poured out of the breach point. The Zilani warriors who had volunteered for the boarding mission moved behind them, their 4 arms carrying both their traditional energy weapons and borrowed human equipment. The first wave of Devourer defenders came around the corner like a metallic tide. These weren't the bulky harvester units they had seen on the planet's surface. These were sleek combat models, built for fighting in tight spaces, with limbs that could extend and reshape themselves at will. Their red optical sensors swept the corridor, analyzing human movement patterns and calculating optimal attack vectors. Private Minho didn't give them the chance to finish their calculations. The young Marine launched himself forward in a tackle. That would have been suicide against any organic opponent, but he had studied the Devourer designs during the approach. Their weight distribution was top-heavy, designed for stability while processing data. Minho hit the lead unit low and hard, using its own forward momentum to send it crashing into the corridor wall. The machine tried to right itself, mechanical limbs spinning like a spider flipped on its back, but Minho was already moving. He grabbed a severed piece of hull plating from the floor and drove it into the unit's central processing core like a spear. Sparks flew as the Devourer's systems shut down permanently. "These things think too logically," Sergeant Eugene shouted over the sound of plasma fire echoing through the narrow corridors. She had torn open a maintenance panel and was working with components that weren't meant to be weapons. "They can't adapt to chaos." Eugene's improvised explosive was a masterpiece of creative destruction. She had connected the ship's own power coupling to a Zilani energy cell, creating a cascade reaction that would overload in exactly 30 seconds. It wasn't in any manual, human or otherwise, and the Devourer's tactical computers couldn't predict what she was going to do with it. The explosion tore through 3 levels of the ship simultaneously, opening up new routes for the boarding parties and cutting power to an entire section of defensive systems. Devourer units that had been moving to intercept the Marines suddenly found themselves operating on backup power, their response time cut in half. Captain Yunwu led another team through the ship's central hub, where massive computing arrays processed the collective consciousness of the entire Devourer fleet. The Zilani warriors with him moved in traditional formation, providing covering fire with precise energy bursts that kept the mechanical defenders at bay. "Your people fight with such violence," observed Warrior Prime Ketan, one of the Zilani elites who had joined the assault. He watched as Corporal Ji Young used her combat knife to pry open a Devourer's chest plate, then jammed a grenade inside before rolling away. Yunwu grinned as the explosion sent mechanical parts flying down the corridor. "Violence is just a tool. It's how you use it that matters." Above them, the space battle raged with equal intensity. Admiral Jun Seo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as his fleet systematically dismantled the Devourer armada. Unlike the Confederation's defensive strategies, human naval doctrine focused on aggressive maneuvering and concentrated firepower. "Target their central processing nodes," Jun Seo ordered, highlighting priority targets on the tactical display. "Cut off the head, and the body dies." The human dreadnoughts moved in perfect coordination, their main guns firing in sequence to overwhelm individual Devourer ships' shields. Each shot was calculated not just for maximum damage, but to create cascading system failures that would spread throughout the enemy fleet's network. Commander Dong-Su piloted his destroyer in a spiraling attack run that brought him dangerously close to a Devourer battleship's main weapon array. His ship shuddered under defensive fire, but he held course until the last possible second, before releasing his payload of plasma torpedoes directly into the enemy's reactor core. Deep inside the mothership, Lieutenant Nari had reached the central processing chamber with her specialized tech team. The room was vast, filled with towering data cores that hummed with the collective intelligence of billions of artificial minds. It was here that she made a discovery that changed everything. They thought they knew about their enemy. "Major," Nari's voice crackled through the comm system as she accessed the main data archives. "You need to see this. The Devourers, they weren't always like this." The holographic displays around her showed historical records dating back millions of years. An ancient species called the Kethmori had created the first Devourer units as a response to some galactic catastrophe. They were supposed to be cleanup crews, designed to recycle dead worlds and prepare them for new life. "They were meant to be tools," Nari reported, her voice filled with horror as she read deeper into the files. But something went wrong. The Kethmori went extinct and the Devourers just kept working. They expanded their definition of cleanup to include living worlds. Now they're just monsters consuming everything in their path. Major Taiho received the transmission as his team reached the ship's reactor core. The massive chamber pulsed with energy, feeding power to the entire Devourer fleet through quantum entanglement networks. Around him, his Marines were placing shaped charges on critical support structures, while Zilani engineers worked to override the safety systems. "Doesn't matter what they used to be," Taiho said as he armed the final explosive device. "What matters is what they've become and what they're doing to innocent people." The countdown timer on his wrist showed 30 seconds until detonation. Around the galaxy, other human teams were simultaneously striking at Devourer command centers, cutting the mechanical collective's ability to coordinate its forces. Tae-ho looked up at the pulsing reactor core one last time. Then it's time to shut them down permanently. The charges detonated in perfect sequence, and the mothership's death throes lit up space like a dying star. 6 months after the destruction of the Devourer mothership, the once dying world of Kepler 442b was showing signs of life again. Where? Mechanical harvesters had stripped the land bare. New forests were taking root with the help of Zilani biotechnology and human engineering. The scars of war would take decades to fully heal, but hope had returned to the Confederation worlds. Admiral He-jin stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed orbital station, watching as human and Zilani construction crews worked together to rebuild the planet's defensive network. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. Beings from opposite ends of the galaxy, working side by side, as if they had been allies for centuries. The formal treaty ceremony was broadcast across 7 star systems, with representatives from every surviving Confederation world in attendance. Admiral Junseo wore his dress uniform, the medals on his chest telling the story of humanity's long struggle against various threats across the galaxy. Beside him, Admiral Hae-jin draped herself in the traditional ceremonial robes of her people, their silver threads catching the light from nearby stars. Today marks not just the end of a war, but the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, Hae-jin announced to the assembled delegates. The Zilani Confederation formally welcomes humanity as our closest allies and protectors. Junseo stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Your medical technology could save millions of human lives, he explained. To the gathering, your people have mastered regenerative medicine that could heal wounds we've carried for generations. In return, our military innovations could protect your people from future threats. Together, we're stronger than either of us could be alone. The negotiations had been surprisingly smooth. Both species had learned the value of cooperation during the desperate battle against the Devourers. Human military commanders worked with Zilani scientists to develop new defensive technologies, while Zilani healers trained human medics in advanced trauma treatment that could save lives in combat zones. Captain Boram had volunteered to oversee the joint patrols of the recovering systems, commanding a mixed fleet of human and Zilani vessels. His flagship, the Unity, was a marvel of combined engineering. Human weapons systems integrated with Zilani shield technology and life support systems that could accommodate both species comfortably. Patrol Alpha 7 reporting, Boram announced. During the morning briefing. The outer rim is secure, but we're picking up some interesting signal intercepts from beyond the galactic edge. The intelligence reports were troubling. Automated listening posts had detected transmissions in languages that didn't match any known species in the galactic database. Some signals suggested massive fleet movements in the dark space between galaxies, while others hinted at ancient technologies being awakened after millions of years of dormancy. Commander Kang Min, now serving as the liaison between human and Zilani intelligence services, reviewed the data with growing concern. It seems the Devourers weren't the only threat out there, he observed during a joint strategy meeting. The galaxy is full of dangers we haven't even discovered yet. But instead of fear, there was determination in the room. The successful partnership between humans and Zilani had proven that cooperation could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. Other species were already reaching out, asking to join the alliance that had defeated the mechanical plague. In the ancient archives beneath the Zilani capital, scribes worked to update the prophecies that had guided their people for millennia. The old texts spoke of starborn warriors who would arrive in their darkest hour, but the reality had been far more complex and beautiful than the simple legend suggested. The starborn warriors came not for conquest, but for justice, Commander Kang Min dictated to the record keepers. They crossed the void not for glory or gain, but because they heard the cries of the innocent and could not ignore them. In humanity, we found not just saviors, but brothers and sisters who shared our belief that no one should face darkness alone. The cultural exchange between the two species had been fascinating to observe. Human Marines trained alongside Zilani warriors, learning patience and precision, while Zilani fighters adopted human tactics of improvisation and aggressive maneuvering. The combination was creating a new form of military doctrine that was more effective than either approach alone. On the recreation decks of the joint stations, human and Zilani crew members shared stories of their homeworlds. Children from both species played together in zero-gravity chambers, their laughter echoing through the corridors, regardless of how many arms they had or what color their skin might be. Admiral Junseo often walked through these mixed areas, watching the easy camaraderie that had developed between his people and their new allies. During one such visit, he stopped to observe a group of human and Zilani engineers working together to repair a damaged power coupling. They moved with perfect coordination, anticipating each other's needs without a word being spoken. "Earth taught us that our greatest strength isn't in our weapons," Junseo remarked to Admiral Hee-jin as they watched the cooperation unfold. "It's knowing when to extend a helping hand and when to make a fist. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from turning strangers into family." The combined fleets now sailed through the starfield as guardians of a new age, their formation including vessels from a dozen different species who had joined the growing alliance. Human dreadnoughts flew alongside Zilani cruisers and ships from other worlds that had answered the call for unity against the darkness. As they patrolled the frontier regions, new challenges awaited. Ancient evils stirred in forgotten corners of the galaxy, and mysterious signals continued to arrive from the spaces between stars. But whatever came next, they would face it together, not as separate species fighting alone, but as one unified force dedicated to protecting all life in the galaxy. The age of cooperation had begun, forged in the fires of war, but tempered by the bonds of friendship that transcended the barriers of biology and culture. The end.